Stranded and desperate, a rich woman offered a poor farmer $1,000 to fix her car. But he refused the money. Instead, he spoke just three simple words. Three words that shattered her entire world and made her weep on the side of a dusty road. Victoria Sterling's world operated on a simple, immutable principle: every problem had a price tag. As a high-powered corporate lawyer, her life was a series of transactions, of converting chaos into billable hours and complex human emotions into neat contractual clauses. Her red Maserati, a gleaming predator of a car, was currently devouring the miles of a desolate state highway, slicing through the sleepy, sun-drenched countryside. It was a world she fundamentally misunderstood, a place where the currency wasn't mergers and acquisitions, but seasons and silence. "No, Paul, I don't care about their sentiment," she said, her voice sharp and clipped, echoing in the confined luxury of the car's interior. "The land has been in their family for a century? That's a lovely story for a history book, not a legal defense. We have a signed offer. Close it." She was on her way to a forced vacation, a mandatory week of disconnection prescribed by her doctor after a particularly brutal takeover battle had left her with a resting heart rate that alarmed him. Her solution was to rent a secluded, minimalist glass house in the middle of nowhere, a place so quiet, she hoped it would finally bore her anxieties into submission. The call ended. Silence descended. For a moment, the only sounds were the purr of the engine and the whisper of the tires on asphalt. Then, another sound joined the symphony, a harsh, metallic cough from under the hood. It was followed by a stutter, then a violent shudder that shook the entire frame of the car. A plume of white smoke billowed from the front, and with a final, pathetic groan, the engine died. The purr was gone. The world was utterly, terrifyingly silent. Victoria stared at the dashboard, at the flashing, angry red lights that confirmed her worst fears. She tried the ignition again. Nothing. "No, no, no," she muttered, her voice rising with each word. "Not here. Not now." She stepped out of the car into a wall of oppressive heat. The air was thick with the smell of sun-baked earth and distant hay. In every direction, there was nothing but endless fields of corn, shimmering under the oppressive afternoon Sunday. She pulled out her phone. No, service. Of course. Panic, a cold and unfamiliar snake, began to coil in her stomach. Her power, her money, her fearsome reputation, they were all useless here. She was just a woman, alone, stranded in a world that didn't care about her schedule. She popped the hood, though she knew it was a futile gesture. A cloud of acrid smoke greeted her. She stared blankly at the complex tangle of wires and machinery, feeling more helpless than she had in her entire adult life. After what felt like an eternity, a shape materialized in the shimmering heat haze down the road. It was an old, rust-pocked tractor, moving at a glacial pace. Atop it sat a man. As he got closer, Victoria's initial wave of relief was quickly tempered by a surge of ingrained prejudice. He was an old black farmer, his face a roadmap of wrinkles carved by decades under the sun, his clothes a pair of faded, dirt-stained overalls. He looked like a caricature from a forgotten era. He brought the tractor to a chugging halt a few feet from her car, the engine idling with a rhythmic putt-putt-putt. He looked at the smoking Maserati, then at the impeccably dressed woman beside it, his expression calm and unreadable. "Looks like you've got some trouble there, ma'am," he said, his voice a low, gentle baritone that seemed to be part of the landscape itself. "Trouble? This is a catastrophe," Victoria snapped, her fear manifesting as irritation. "The car is dead. My phone has no signal. I am in the middle of nowhere." The man simply nodded, taking in the situation without any visible alarm. He dismounted from his tractor with a slow, deliberate movement and walked towards the car. "Mind if I take a look?" Victoria was about to refuse, to tell him that a machine this complex was beyond his comprehension, but her desperation won out. "Fine," she said, waving a dismissive hand at the engine. He peered under the hood, his gaze knowledgeable. He pointed to a frayed belt. "Well, there's your problem right there." Serpentine belt snapped clean in two. Victoria's heart sank. "Can you fix it?" He stroked his chin thoughtfully. "Fix it? No, not without a new part. But I reckon I can rig something up to get you to town. My workshop's just over that hill. Got all sorts of odds and ends in there. Relief, sharp and overwhelming, flooded through her. The problem had a solution, and a solution, in her world, had a price. She immediately shifted back into her comfort zone. The transaction. She opened her designer handbag and pulled out her wallet, extracting a thick wad of cash. She quickly counted out 10 $100 bills. "All right, here's the deal," she said, her voice reverting to its usual brisk, businesslike tone. She held out the money to him. $1,000. Cash. "You get this car running, get me to the nearest town with a decent mechanic, and this is yours. I don't have time to waste." She expected an immediate reaction. A flash of greed in his eyes, a quick snatching of the cash, an eager nod. It was a language everyone understood. An obscene amount of money for a simple task was the fastest way to ensure loyalty and efficiency. But Samuel Washington did not react as expected. He looked at the fan of crisp bills in her hand. Then he looked up at her face, his eyes, dark and clear, seeming to look right through her expensive sunglasses and into the panic she was trying so hard to conceal. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just held her gaze, his expression a calm, unreadable mask. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. The only sounds were the rhythmic chugging of his tractor and the frantic beating of Victoria's own heart. His refusal to acknowledge the money was more unnerving than any argument. It was a rejection not just of her offer, but of her entire worldview. For the first time in a very long time, Victoria Sterling had encountered a problem she might not be able to buy her way out of, and the realization left her completely, utterly adrift. The $1,000 remained suspended in the space between them, an offering on an altar to a god who wasn't listening. Victoria's hand, holding the crisp bills, began to feel heavy, foolish. Samuel's silence was a quiet, unyielding wall against which her assumptions were beginning to crack. Finally, after a moment that felt like an eternity, he spoke, his voice as calm and steady as the endless fields around them. "Let's see what we can do," he said, his words completely ignoring the money. He turned his back on her and her offer, and with a slow, methodical grace, leaned back over the engine of her car. Victoria was left standing there, money in hand, feeling a strange mixture of indignation and bewilderment. She had just offered this man more money than he likely saw in a month, and he had treated it as if it were a mild irrelevance, like a fly buzzing at the edge of his vision. In her world, this was not how things worked. Money was the great motivator, the universal language. To have it so casually dismissed was not just insulting, it was deeply unsettling. It was as if the laws of physics had momentarily ceased to apply. She huffed, stuffing the bills back into her wallet with a frustrated shove. "Fine," she muttered under her breath. "Have it your way." She began to pace the dusty shoulder of the road, the sharp clicks of her designer heels a frantic, out-of-place rhythm against the rural silence. Patience had never been one of Victoria's virtues. Her life was a meticulously scheduled symphony of 15-minute increments. Waiting, for her, was a form of torture, a sign that she had lost control. And right now, she had lost all control. She was at the mercy of this strange, silent old man and the wounded beast of her Italian sports car. She glanced at her gold watch, a nervous, repeated tick. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The sun beat down, relentless and white-hot. Her frustration compelled her to watch him. She expected to see a fumbling, amateurish attempt at repair, which would justify her impatience. Instead, she found herself watching a master at work. Samuel's hands, though gnarled and stained with the earth of 1,000 harvests, moved with a surprising dexterity and an unhurried confidence. He didn't curse or bang on the machinery. He simply observed, his touch gentle as he prodded wires and tested tensions. He seemed to be in a quiet conversation with the engine, listening to its secrets. There was a dignity in his labor, a focused, meditative quality that Victoria, whose work consisted of phone calls and digital signatures, found both alien and strangely compelling. She saw the quiet competence of a man who had spent a lifetime fixing his own world, from a leaky roof to a broken tractor engine, without the luxury of calling a specialist. He wasn't just a farmer. He was an engineer of necessity, a craftsman of survival. The realization was a small, uncomfortable pinprick in the balloon of her own self-importance. The sun climbed higher, reaching its zenith. The heat was becoming unbearable. Victoria's silk blouse was sticking to her back, and beads of perspiration dotted her forehead. The cool, controlled world of her air-conditioned car and office felt a million miles away. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and increasingly irritable. Just as her frustration was about to boil over, Samuel straightened up. He wiped his hands on a rag he pulled from his back pocket and looked at her. "Be right back," he said, and without another word, he turned and began to walk away, back towards the distant farmhouse. Panic flared in Victoria's chest. "Wait! Where are you going?" she called after him. Had he given up? Was he abandoning her here? Was this some kind of rural trick, leaving her stranded so he could come back later and what? The thought died before it could fully form. It was absurd. He didn't answer, just continued his steady, unhurried walk, his figure growing smaller in the shimmering heat. Victoria was left alone with the silent car and her own spiraling anxieties. She slumped against the hot metal of the door, defeated. This was it, her worst-case scenario realized. But 10 minutes later, she saw his shape reappear on the horizon. He was carrying something. As he got closer, she saw that it was 2 glass bottles, beaded with condensation, the liquid inside a pale, inviting yellow. He walked up to her and held one out. "Fresh lemonade," he said simply. "My wife's recipe. The sun could be unforgiving out here if you're not used to it." Victoria stared at the bottle as if it were an alien artifact. It was a gesture of simple, unprompted human kindness. There was no angle, no hidden agenda. It was just water, sugar, and lemons. A gift. She took it, her fingers brushing against his. His hand was rough as bark, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. "Thank you," she managed to say, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. She hadn't genuinely thanked anyone for something so simple in years. She drank. The lemonade was cold, sharp, and incredibly refreshing. It was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. As the cool liquid soothed her parched throat, it also seemed to extinguish some of the fire of her impatience. She watched him as he drank his own, leaning against the front of her car, looking out over the fields that were his life's work. For the first time, she saw him not as an obstacle or a tool to be used, but as a person. This newfound calm, however, was short-lived. Another half an hour crawled by. Samuel was now rigging something together with a piece of thick, rubbery material he'd brought back from his workshop. The temporary peace Victoria had felt from the lemonade evaporated, replaced by the familiar, gnawing anxiety of her schedule. The secluded glass house, the week of disconnection, it all seemed like a distant dream. She had things to do, calls to make, people to manage. This slow, silent, sun-drenched limbo was driving her mad. Her carefully constructed composure finally snapped. The frustration, the heat, the helplessness, it all erupted. "Are you ever going to finish?" she burst out, her voice sharp and brittle, shattering the rural peace. "I mean, can you actually fix this or not? Was the $1,000 not enough? Is that it? Because I can pay more. Just name your price and get this done." The words were out before she could stop them, a toxic spew of her own worldview. She instantly regretted them, but it was too late. The transactional, impatient, and arrogant core of her personality had been laid bare under the hot country Sunday. Victoria's voice, sharp and laced with the familiar venom of frustrated privilege, hung in the hot, still air. The words echoed back at her, sounding uglier and more hollow in the vast, open space than they ever did in a boardroom. She expected an immediate reaction, a flare of anger, a defensive retort, or, at the very least, a greedy flicker of interest at the mention of more money. She had armed herself for a negotiation, for the predictable dance of transaction she knew so well. But Samuel did not dance. He simply stopped. His hands, which had been deftly manipulating the makeshift belt, fell still. He remained hunched over the engine for a long moment, his back to her, and the silence that followed was more profound and damning than any angry shout could have been. Victoria felt a cold dread creep up her spine. She had crossed a line, not a contractual one, but a human one, and she had no idea what the consequences would be. Slowly, methodically, he straightened up. He picked up a greasy rag from the fender and wiped his hands with a deliberate, almost ceremonial slowness. Every movement was calm, measured, and filled with a quiet weight. Then, he turned to face her. Victoria braced herself, but the face that met hers was not one of anger. It was something far more disarming. His dark eyes, which had previously been calm and observant, now held a deep, profound sadness. It was not the sadness of a man who had been insulted, but the sadness of a doctor looking at a patient who refuses to acknowledge their own illness. He looked at her, and in his gaze, she felt she was being seen, truly seen for the first time that day. He wasn't looking at her expensive clothes, her fancy watch, or the luxury car behind her. He was looking straight through all of it, into the frantic, lonely, and terrified heart of the woman within. She prepared for a lecture on manners, a weary sigh about city folk, or a renewed demand for a higher price. Her mind, a machine built for conflict and negotiation, cycled through a dozen possible rebuttals and counteroffers. Instead, Samuel spoke 3 simple words. His voice was not accusatory. It was not condescending. It was a gentle, factual statement, delivered with the quiet authority of an undeniable truth. You need help. The words landed not in her ears, but directly in her soul. They bypassed every defense, every layer of armor she had built around herself over the years. It was a perfectly aimed arrow, striking the one vulnerable spot she didn't even know she had. You need help. He didn't say, the car needs help. He didn't say, I need help. He said, you need help. And in that single, shattering moment, Victoria Sterling's entire world fractured. For years, she had been the one who helped, the one who solved, the one who paid. She was the fixer, the closer, the powerful lawyer who swooped in to manage the messy, incompetent lives of others. She was the one who gave help, never the one who needed it. To need help was to be weak, to be vulnerable, to be a victim. It was everything she had fought her entire life not to be. But in 3 simple words, this old farmer had stripped away her identity. He saw that her impatience was not a sign of her importance, but of her fear. He saw that her reliance on money was not a display of her power, but of her profound inability to connect with another human being. He saw that her anger was not directed at him or the car, but at her own terrifying helplessness. He saw a woman so lost in the gilded cage of her own making that she had forgotten how to simply be a person in the world. She looked at this man, at his calm, compassionate face, and she saw everything she was not: patient, self-sufficient, and at peace. She looked at her $1,000 offer, now feeling like a pathetic and childish tantrum, and she understood. She hadn't been offering him a solution. She had been trying to buy him off, to keep him in his simple, authentic world at a safe, transactional distance. The realization was a physical blow. The armor she had worn for so long, the one forged in the fires of ambition and loneliness, simply disintegrated. And underneath, she was just a woman, stranded on a dusty road, completely and utterly alone. A sound escaped her, a choked, broken sob. Her hand flew to her mouth, as if to physically push the sound back down. But it was too late. The dam had broken. The tears she had held back for years through a bitter divorce, through lonely holidays, through countless soulless victories, in court came streaming down her face. They were hot, shameful, and utterly cleansing. She stood there, in front of the stranger, and wept. Not for the broken car, not for the ruined schedule, but for the profound poverty of her own soul. She cried for the woman who knew the price of everything, but the value of nothing. The sobs that racked Victoria's body were raw and uncontrolled, the sound of a carefully constructed dam finally breaking. Samuel did not move. He did not offer empty platitudes or awkward reassurances. He simply stood there, a silent, steady witness to her unraveling, giving her the rare and profound gift of letting her be completely, unapologetically vulnerable without judgment. His quiet presence was more comforting than any words could have been. After a few minutes, when the storm of her emotions began to subside into shuddering breaths, he reached into the back pocket of his overalls. He pulled out a clean, neatly folded blue and white checkered handkerchief. It was old and soft from countless washings. He held it out to her, his gesture simple and direct. Victoria took it, her hand trembling. The cotton was cool and smelled faintly of sunshine and clean laundry. She pressed it to her face, the simple, honest scent a grounding anchor in the sea of her chaotic emotions. I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice hoarse, the words inadequate. Samuel just gave a slow, understanding nod. "No need for that," he said gently. With the emotional crisis having passed, he turned his attention back to the car as if nothing had happened, giving her the space to compose herself. "It's not the belt after all," he said, his voice returning to its practical, calm tone. He pointed deep into the engine. "See that there? It's just a loose battery cable. Happens sometimes on these bumpy roads if it's not tightened down just right. The jolt must have knocked it clean off the terminal." He reached into his pocket and produced a small, multi-purpose tool. With a few deft turns of his wrist, he reconnected the cable and tightened the clamp. The action was so simple, so anticlimactic after the emotional turmoil, that it was almost comical. All her panic, all her frustration, had been over a loose wire. "Try her now," he said, stepping back from the car. Still dazed, Victoria slid back into the driver's seat. The leather felt different, less like a symbol of her status, and more like a shield she had been hiding behind. She took a deep breath, turned the key in the ignition, and the Maserati roared back to life, its powerful purr a stark contrast to the quiet dignity of the man standing on the roadside. The sound was a jolt back to reality. The problem was solved. The transaction, in her mind, was complete, but she was no longer the same woman who had stepped out of the car an hour ago. She turned off the engine and got out, walking back to him. She opened her handbag, her movements now deliberate and respectful. She pulled out the same 10 $100 bills. This time, however, she didn't brandish them like a weapon. She held them out with both hands, a humble offering. "Please," she said, her voice quiet but firm, stripped of all its earlier arrogance. "Please, take this. This isn't for your time. It's not payment for a job. It's a thank you. For everything." Samuel looked at the money, then back at her face. He saw the change in her eyes, the sincerity that had replaced the desperation. A small, kind smile touched his lips. He gently placed his rough, calloused hand over hers and pushed the money back towards her. "Kindness doesn't have a price, ma'am," he said, his voice soft but resolute. "You were in trouble, and I helped. That's what neighbors do, even if they've only just met. You just keep your money." He gave her hand a gentle pat. "You just drive safe now, you hear?" He turned and began to walk back towards his tractor, leaving her standing there, once again holding a sum of money that had been rendered completely meaningless. He had refused her payment, not once, but twice. He had given her his time, his skill, and a profound life lesson, and had asked for absolutely nothing in return. Numbly, Victoria got back into her car. She placed the $1,000 on the passenger seat beside her. The crisp bills, once a symbol of her power and control, now seemed like flimsy, useless paper. She started the car and pulled slowly back onto the road, her mind reeling. She drove for a mile, then two. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, a masterpiece she would have never noticed before. Her mind kept replaying the scene, replaying his 3 words, "You need help." He was right. She had built a life of such insulated, transactional loneliness that a simple act of human decency had completely shattered her. The thought of driving away, of returning to her cold, empty glass house and her even colder, emptier life, was suddenly unbearable. The biggest problem of her day hadn't been the broken-down car. The biggest problem was her, and she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she couldn't fix it alone. With a decisive movement, she slowed the car, pulled a sharp U-turn in the middle of the deserted road, and headed back the way she had come. She didn't know what she was going to say or do. She just knew she couldn't let this encounter end with her simply driving away. For the first time, she wasn't running from a problem. She was driving towards a solution. Victoria drove back to the spot where her car had broken down, the tire tracks still visible in the dust. She parked the Maserati on the side of the road and looked towards the distant farmhouse, a small, sturdy silhouette against the deepening twilight. She had no plan, no strategy. For the first time, she was operating purely on instinct, a gut feeling that turning back was the most important decision she had made all day. She had passed a small, bustling farmer's market on her way. On her return journey, she had stopped. Instead of her wallet, she had filled a wicker basket with the best of what the local earth had to offer: fresh corn, ripe tomatoes, a crusty loaf of bread, and a homemade apple pie that was still warm to the touch. It wasn't a payment, it was an offering. She walked up the long, dusty path to the farmhouse, the basket feeling heavy and right in her arms. Samuel was sitting on his front porch in a rocking chair, watching the last sliver of sun disappear below the horizon. He didn't seem surprised to see her. He simply watched her approach, his expression as calm and knowing as ever. Victoria stopped at the bottom of the wooden porch steps, feeling more nervous than she ever had before a courtroom judge. "You refuse my money?" she said, her voice clear and steady. "Twice." Samuel gave a slow nod. "I did." "So please," she said, lifting the basket, "accept my invitation instead. I'd like to cook you dinner, as a thank you." He looked at the basket, then back at her face, and a genuine, warm smile spread across his features, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Now that," he said, his voice rumbling with a gentle amusement, "is an offer a man can accept." The scene that followed was one Victoria could never have imagined. She, Victoria Sterling, a woman whose kitchen was a stainless steel showroom she barely used, found herself in a simple, rustic farmhouse kitchen. Under Samuel's quiet guidance, she shucked corn and sliced tomatoes. They worked in a comfortable silence, the only sounds the clatter of utensils and the sizzle of food in a cast-iron skillet. They ate dinner on the front porch, the night air cool and filled with the sound of crickets. The food was simple, but it was the best meal Victoria had had in years because it was shared. She told him about her frantic, lonely life in the city, about the constant pressure and the gnawing emptiness. He told her about his late wife, about the changing seasons, and about the simple, profound joy of watching something grow from a tiny seed. They were two people from two completely different worlds, yet they found a common ground in their shared humanity, in the quiet loneliness that had defined both of their lives in different ways. As she finally prepared to leave, hours later, she turned to him. "Those 3 words you said to me," she began. "Why did you say them?" Samuel stopped rocking. "Because I saw my wife in your eyes," he said softly. "Before she passed, the illness made her angry sometimes. Frustrated, she'd lash out because she felt helpless. But underneath all that noise, all she really wanted was for someone to see that she was scared, that she needed help." He looked at Victoria. "Everyone's fighting a battle you can't see. Sometimes, all folks need is to be seen." Victoria drove away from the farmhouse that night under a brilliant canopy of stars she had never noticed in the city. The $1,000 was still on her passenger seat, but it was no longer her currency. Victoria Sterling learned a powerful lesson on that dusty country road, that there are some problems in life a checkbook cannot solve, and some debts that can only be paid with gratitude. She had offered $1,000 to fix a machine, but a wise old farmer had given her something priceless with just 3 words. He didn't just fix her car. He recalibrated her soul, reminding her that a person's greatest value is not found in what they carry in their wallet, but in the kindness they carry in their heart. And sometimes, the most important journey you can take is the U-turn back to a moment that changed you forever.